Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. Again, I am Kaylee Batesman, the content director at She Can Co. And today we are discussing making the leap into tech. Whether your dream job hasn't lived up to your hopes or that motherhood has changed your work expectations, it doesn't matter what's led you to this point. How can you use your transferable skills to excel in the world of tech, and what can the world of tech offer you? Today we'll be covering why companies need to invest and support mums and what they need to do to eliminate the motherhood penalty so many face. To discuss this and more, I've got the fabulous Becks Carrington, Head of Product at Sparkbox, with me today. Welcome, Becks. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on and chatting about this important topic with us today. Can we get started with a bit of background about yourself to set the scene, please?
Yeah, let's do it. So my background is actually retail. I actually started out by doing a politics and economics degree at Bristol University. And when I did that, most people in my course were looking for job roles in like finance or banking. And at 21 years old, I just thought getting a job at a bank sounded like the most boring thing in the world. I was quite creative. So
I was going to say, right, you went straight for politics, economics, banking.
yeah. So I was like, I want to work somewhere other than a bank. And I started looking at other things that I could do with that skill set. I loved clothes and fashion when I was at university. So I started looking into retailer jobs and sort of thinking maybe I could work in finance there. But I stumbled across merchandising. And merchandising in retail fashion is essentially, if you're a merchandiser, it's a role that works with buyers and designers. So designers and buyers come up with product for retailers to sell. And the merchandiser is essentially the person who's got the purse strings. So I worked with the buyers on teams. We would have a budget. And what you have to do is the buyers and the designers show you all the product that they want to buy. And as a merchandiser, you work with them to work out where's the best place to sell it, what the best stores to sell it in. And then when the product actually comes in, the merchandisers tend to be the people who make the decisions about pricing and strategy and should we buy more, should we put it in sale, that kind of thing. So it was a great career move for me in the sense that I was very creative, but also from a sort of a mathematical background. I started out as a graduate at Arcadia working for Dorothy Perkins, but the majority of my merchandising career was at New Look, where I worked my way up to senior merchandiser. After that, I had my first child, and that's why I sort of pivoted my roles a little bit within retail. So staying within the retail sector, I went on to work sort of, it's called central planning, which is essentially like merchandising strategy. It's like linking up merchandising strategies with sort of financial and what's the best ways to make profit and helping merchandisers make decisions that will help with margin. Then I managed the New Look website during the pandemic, which was a crazy time.
Wow, but that was
It made
insane.
yeah, that was probably the first time I learned a bit more about, I could do the trade side, but I learned a bit more about like the limitations you might have on the website or on the app. So, it's very all fair and well as a merchandiser to say, oh, I think we should put this product here, there, but they couldn't do some things within their system. So that was really interesting for me. Also learned a lot more about how the customer is very different online because you have to bring traffic to the site rather than people walking in store. And then I had my second child, and I actually came back as head of PMO at New Look, which was managing all of the capital investment at New Look, making sure projects were being completed on time within budget, overseeing what people were doing on the product-led areas. And I really enjoyed that because I started getting sort of exposure to the tech side of New Look, which I hadn't seen in the 12 years that I'd been there. I started getting a bit more involved in understanding project-led delivery, but also product-led delivery. So I did some agile courses with like our app team and started showing quite an interest in that. I thought it was quite interesting how those sort of things worked. And while I was doing that role, I then came across the company Sparkbox, who are advertising on a retail website. Sparkbox is a startup company. We're a tech startup that make apps to help merchandisers make better decisions. They're essentially tools. We use AI to make sales forecasts, and then we make apps to help merchandisers for things like the best, most profitable ways to put product into sale, or the best product you should rebuy back, or to help them plan their assortments, things like that. And when I saw the company, I just really thought that is the sort of tool that would make a huge difference in merchandising. And as someone who'd been in that industry a long time, I felt like that's something I'm interested in moving into. So I applied for the role, even though I hadn't worked in tech before. And I sort of said, I've got a lot of skills. I know the end user really well. And now I've been at Sparkbox for a year. So I've been leading the product area, and, I do things that are very comfortable and like very much like my old role. So I run the roadmaps and make sure priorities aligned, which would be the sort of things I would have done in my previous roles. And then the other thing that I've done is I've learned lots of new things. So a lot of my role is about app development and design and making sure we're in the right direction with all that. And in the year I've been there, we've designed and developed 2 brand new apps, along with lots of new features for our current ones. And it's been great because I just love learning and developing my skills. I've really loved learning the app design side and thinking about UX and UI. So it just feels like my creative side's back. And I don't know, it's been really nice for me because I just feel like it's a whole new sort of string to my career.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, your journey, it sounds like you kind of touched upon tech within New Look. They kind of gave you the freedom to touch upon, learn new things, and kind of start to look into the world of tech, and then you kind of naturally progressed more into the tech industry. Did you think that at the time when you were in retail? Did you think, what, one day I could say I work in the tech industry, or did you just not really put the two together at the time?
No, I'm not sure I would have. I mean, tech,
put them together.
yeah. I'm not sure I would have. I think tech, maybe I would have at age 21 when we talked about finance, maybe I would have reacted in tech in the same way, because I would have thought, oh God, it's like coding and development, and that's not what I'm interested in. But then obviously, as I mentioned, I went through my career learning more and more about like companies investing in tech and apps and things like that. And obviously this, that I've been in the industry, I've been working for 16, 17 years now. And, apps, obviously the way that that's developed and become so much of a bigger thing in retail and every other industry, it's much more at the forefront. And as I mentioned, I've been getting more involved in that. So I think it was a gradual thing for me and wasn't necessarily something I've been thinking about for years. But after doing definitely the e-com role and the PMO role, I realized there could be a lot of scope for some exciting careers within the tech industry.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, obviously, Sparkbox, because I was very interested in the company, that's why I kind of ended up making that sidestep. But one thing I do know about me is what gives me kicks in my career and at work is learning new things and developing new skills. And I think for me, that step into tech at the time that I did it, it was a time when I really wanted to see something different. I'd been at my previous company a really long time, and I was ready to learn new things,
Yeah, and you have to keep up with the tech industry. It just moves so fast, and that leads us into our discussion today, because there is, obviously there has been a discussion on this podcast before about when ladies step away from the tech industry, sometimes because they're becoming a parent, or it might even be, to care for loved ones. Coming back sometimes can be difficult because the tech sector has moved so fast. But the tech sector has so many wonderful benefits for women. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Why do you think the tech sector is such a good sector for women, and more specifically for mums?
Yeah. Well, I think it is worth knowing I didn't move into tech because I was a mum. I moved into Sparkbox because when I saw that role being advertised, I just thought the product looked so exciting and useful. And when I interviewed, I thought it'd be a great learning curve for me, but also that I could benefit the company and add skills to the company. However, what was incredibly refreshing about Sparkbox was they were very supportive of the fact that I needed flexibility with childcare, and they accepted my request for working 4 days a week, which obviously for me, because Sparkbox could do that, that really motivated me to take the job.
Yeah.
And I think
and
really
to
this,
stay
yeah,
and to be loyal and stay, and probably try a lot harder than any other job.
yeah, I think this is the ideal for working mothers. Like, as a mum, you should be able to work in any role that you have the skills for, in any sector that you have expertise in. Mothers don't want their work choices to be dictated because of company rules and lack of flexibility. But unfortunately, as mothers, we sometimes do need that flexibility because we've got to pick up kids or because we've got to be working from home certain days. What I do think about tech companies is more generally than other industries, they tend to embrace the kind of hybrid and flexible working culture more than other industries. And I
Yes.
think the reason that they do that is because I think that happened more pre-COVID than with other industries. So where a lot of industries maybe have a bit of hybrid and work from home now is because they were thrown into it in COVID. But I don't think that was the case with tech. My husband's a developer and has worked in tech for years, and he always had, some degree of flexibility, some degree of working from home. So I do think for mothers that want to get into tech industry, you're more likely to get that package than you are in other companies, although I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule everywhere. But what I would love is that's not the only driver for you to go into tech. Like my vision for all mums, whatever industry is in, that you should be able to do what you want to do in your career without being restricted by having children, essentially.
Yes, it's interesting to hear you say your husband's a developer. And I had another lady on here, similar story, and we had two ladies on a live webinar recently. Husbands were developers, and that is how they transitioned into tech, because as you said, they saw sometimes the benefits of working in tech, flexible working, and it's like they
Mhm.
kind of looked at what their husbands' day are like, and they're thinking, actually, that would work very well for me.
Yeah.
And also we touched upon a little bit about there's just the benefits of, when you hire a working mum, as you said, if you give somebody that flexibility, like yourself, you was very grateful of having the 4 days, and just understanding that you're a parent, and you have different priorities, and you sometimes need that flexibility. You instantly think, well, I'm going to be more loyal, I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to work incredibly hard. There are lots of benefits, aren't there, to hiring working mums? What are some of those benefits?
Well, firstly, I think this question itself, what are the benefits like hiring working mums? Like again, I think I sort of said it in my last question, but for me, I just really, really hope my 6-year-old daughter, by the time that she's in the work world, we're not asking that question, because obviously you
Yes.
wouldn't say the same about working fathers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think at this point in time, there is a discrimination against working mothers and also women of childbearing age. It's not just people that have children. I just think a lot of the time, women their mid to late, early 30s, 20s, we are getting a discrimination. There's a bias that potentially they're going to have a baby, and having a baby, if you've had a baby, that you therefore might have other commitments, so you're less committed to work. And I think that is unfortunately like a bias that happens in hiring. But for me, what the dream would be is that if companies stopped thinking about the negatives of working mothers and more thought about the positives. So rather than just thinking about someone who needs to work flexible hours, maybe thinking about what extra skills does a working mum have that maybe other people might not have. So for me, when you have kids, I just feel like your whole world turns on its head. So, like suddenly you have this tiny little being that you have to look after, and it's just like a full-time job, and it's relentless, and you're not sleeping. And it's just, I mean, your whole life changes, everything that you knew, your independence, you're suddenly caring for this beautiful thing you love, but it's so, so, so hard. And I think that mothers that go through that, they're high, it's such a huge change in your life. Those people, you've got those skills where you're highly adaptable to change.
Yeah.
I think there's lots of other transferable skills you pick up while being a mother. So if you have kids, young kids, you've got a lot of resilience. I mentioned sleepless nights, trying to keep your child alive in the first few months. I had to summon up like all the strength I had. And I think that you also have a lot of skills in organization and time management when you're a mother. So when you've got a tiny baby, it's like actually you have to be the most organized person in the world to get out for a doctor's appointment at 9 a.m. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a huge achievement. But actually, when you have older kids, like now I've got one in school and one in nursery, and the juggle of trying to make sure I get to work on time, they get to work on time, everyone is fed, everyone has their clothes washed. I also do a really good job at work if that's all those things. To actually do that whole juggle, you have to be really organized, you have to be really good at time management, you have to be really efficient with your time. I think mums in general tend to be quite independent, we're strong, we're resourceful. I think especially when you've got older kids, you have to work on your communication and your negotiation skills, with my toddler, I have to negotiate them eating vegetables, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So with your partners, like it is such a hard job, both of you navigating the world through working and being parents. You know, you have to get really good communication skills with your partner as well to be able to do it. So I think with this in mind, I would just hope which when companies are looking at hiring mums, they maybe would ask some questions about that in the interview process. You can look at someone's CV and you can see whether they're qualified and they've got the right experience for a role. But unless you ask the right questions, you might not know all these skills they've picked up that aren't on their CV. So if I was interviewing like someone who'd come off mat leave and was looking for a new job, I'd actually ask the question, what sort of skills have you learned while you've been on maternity leave? And I think companies would be pleasantly surprised by the sort of things that women have picked up. Um, I I'm pretty sure all companies, if you ask the CEO what type of candidates do you want applying for roles at your company, they'd say you want someone with great organization. They'd say they want someone who's resilient, someone who's adaptable to change. And I think there's a lot of working mothers that go above and beyond in those kind of skills because they've had to change, like cope with such a huge part change in their life and do such like, you know, two full-time jobs in some cases.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
my thing would be to say to all companies, maybe try and think what's not in the CV for working mothers and try and find out what skills that they could be gaining from mothers. I think there's lots of
Yes.
positives.
Definitely, because most tech employers they tend to say it's not all about the coding skills or the technical qualifications or whatever it is that you need to do your job. A lot of them actually fall back on a lot of the soft skills that you just mentioned and how important they are.
Mm-hmm.
To you might get a graduate that goes into a role who has the tech qualifications that needed, but they don't have all of those life skills and those soft skills that come with just life. Basically, as you said, you
Yeah.
might move into the role of being a parent and all the things that come with it. I love the fact that you mentioned time management, because I had a lady on this podcast who was a parent, and she threw in something quite interesting. She said that a lot of companies seem to think, or teams seem to think, if you're working with working mothers, for instance, their days might be quite sporadic, and they'll need flexibility because lots of things might happen within that day. And actually, it's not, because the way that you just described it is it's a juggle to get everybody out where they need to be on time in the morning. But actually, you would prefer to keep a set routine and not
Mm-hmm.
have change, because it's very hard to introduce change when you have small people that need to be in places and you need to be in places. So actually it's far, it's kind of, you have your schedule and you try to stick to that, and a lot of working mothers tend to find it's quite hard if you were to jump ship and move to another company, because your whole routine might change again. Whereas is it yourself? Would you just prefer your day to day, try and keep it as to go into plan as possible?
Yeah. Don't know about that. I mean, like, uh, when I moved to Sparkbox, I wasn't too worried about like keeping my work-life balance and routine. But I do think it's a real struggle for parents. The one thing that's really hard from the time management point of view is that in some ways, parents know exactly where they need to be there and then. And like you say, get kids into school and then you can work and you don't actually have that distraction. And for me, I find that when I'm actually sitting down at work after a weekend, it's sometimes, I mean, I definitely didn't feel this pre having children. It's an excitement because it's a bit of independence. It's a bit of
Yeah.
time on my own. It's time for me to like be myself a bit and, sort of do my thing. So I think there's that kind of relief. Obviously, what's hard from a time management point of view is that what you don't know as a parent, what might come next. Like you don't know whether your childminder is going to call in sick or whether there's going to be a stomach bug at nursery or something like that. And that's when it obviously gets hard with the juggle.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether I think people aren't very empathetic to that, but actually it's a lot of personal pressure, that sort of thing that mothers have to juggle. So it is
Yes.
hard. But
Yes.
yeah.
And as we spoke about that before, when things are hard, and when you're onto a good company that understands that and helps with when you need that flexibility. Because according to a recent Harvard study, mothers were considered to be 12.1% less committed to their jobs than non-mothers currently. What can we do to erase this motherhood penalty, do you think?
Yeah, it's the sort of question you kind of want to swear in, isn't it? This one,
Yes.
swear out. So firstly, I find this statistic so depressing.
Yep.
But I do think there's probably a lot of reasons for it, unfortunately. Misguided ones, but I can see where it comes from. So firstly, I think I mentioned it already, but I do think parents are under a lot of personal pressure. So you've got to juggle pickups, child sickness, school holidays. You might have to juggle a lack of sleep. All of those things. You might have child with additional needs. You've got certain things you have to do. And due to this, a lot of parents will ask to maybe work less days in the week or have more flexible hours or work from home some days. And on top of this, I just mentioned it, but you can't predict when you need to be off. For example, your childcare falls through.
Yeah.
And I think that then these two factors for other employees may make the perception that parents aren't as dedicated to their job, which is actually sad because I think it's actually that the parents under a lot of pressure, not that they're necessarily not dedicated to their job. And also, just on that note, I mean, single parents, even more pressure. Like, amazing if you're a single working parent juggling all that, in my opinion. I think the other one is if you're someone who's taken some leave, some maternity leave or paternity leave, and you're off for a year, I think then that often allows other people to create the narrative that you may be less committed because they can say, well, they weren't here for this big project, so, they didn't recently contribute to that. And I think that's the tough thing for working mothers. So I think that's why people would think working mothers are less committed, even though it's sad. So I think there's things that we need to do. I think there's government level things, organizational level things, and personal things that we all should do to try and, eradicate this thought, because I don't think mothers are less dedicated than other employees. I think from a government perspective, the most obvious thing to do to help working parents would be to provide more financial support for early years education and wraparound and holiday care.
Yeah.
So the UK is terrible. I think we've got the highest early years costs in Europe, which is awful, I think.
Yeah.
I've had quite a lot of my peers and friends not go back to work because financially they earn more, or they'd be better off at home.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's another problem in itself. How many great candidates are we losing from the job market that never come back? So that's just a problem in itself. And then obviously there's people that do come back and you've got to make some decisions about financial pay. And then also the wraparound care and school holiday care is very expensive. So if you are a working parent, you have to pay for that in order to have good childcare. So I think if the government helped with those costs, that's obviously going to take a lot of pressure off working mothers. And it also might help dissipate some of the views that working mothers haven't got proper care and aren't dedicated enough, hopefully. It was quite a big shock to me that the Conservative budget this year did have quite a lot about early years and wraparound care. I am skeptical whether logistically they'll get it off the ground. But for me, the premise of governments investing in this is the most important thing that could help the motherhood penalty. Like, I feel so passionately, this is something we need to be doing as a society. Just especially in early years as well. Such an important time of a child's development.
Definitely.
From an organizational level point of view, for me, I think company benefits for part-time, flexible, and also maternity and paternity leave should be offered and encouraged for working fathers as much as it is for working mothers.
Yeah.
So there's that phrase that behind every great man is a good woman. But in my view, behind every great working parent is a great support bubble.
Yeah.
And often that will come in the form of your partner, whether they be male or female. And so what I would like is that if companies are encouraging men also to work flexibly and have shortened hours, then it becomes the norm and it takes the bias off working mothers a lot more. It means that if you encourage flexibility to all parents, it means that no matter what sex, we've all got sort of equal opportunities to still develop and work with our careers and hopefully reduce the gender pay gap. I actually don't think this just applies to mothers and fathers as well.
Yeah.
I think in general, flexible hours and part-time working should be encouraged across the whole business and used by everyone. You know, we're not in a world these days where our lives are just work. Like there might be people who have other commitments outside work, or they just want to finish early and do something different, you know. I want to encourage people to ask for those, make those flexible requests, and for companies to give them to people, because the more people work in a different way and input in different to the usual 9 to 5, the easier it is for us working mothers to have less bias on our input on time and be considered as committed as everyone else.
You do think if you're at the wrong company and you're not getting what you need, you will just jump ship. And you saying there, it's not just parents, it's people who are, for instance, caring for anybody. I was caring for a parent. I needed to be closer to home, and the company that I was at, they required me to travel a lot internationally, and it was just something I just couldn't do. And I actually, and they were a wonderful company, but I actually just ended up leaving to go, you know, I took a complete change in career direction just so I could be at a company where I could just not, you know, have that craziness of a career and thinking I've got to be here and I've got to be there. I just at that moment in time just needed to have my job, do my 9 to 5, be close to home, be close to the hospital if I needed to get there, and that was it. But if companies don't put things in place, they're not going to retain those, you know, those mums or whoever it is that needs, you know, some kind of flexibility at that point. And the company I went to were wonderful when it came to flexibility. I just you don't tend to stick it out, do you? If a company isn't doing something to help you or put something in place, you just tend to go, don't you?
Yeah, and we all go through tougher times in our life as well. I'd like to see the norm that you can maybe, you know, ask it, all people are now allowed to ask for flexible working as part of the law now, but whether companies are actually adhering to it is what I would like to encourage, because I think that's what will help working mothers. I think that you know, we all go through times in our lives where maybe work isn't always the thing that you're the most important thing in your life. Like you might have illness, or you might have, like you say, caring for someone, and then children sometimes as well. And I think that if companies were a bit more fluid and a bit more flexible in general with everyone, not just working parents, it would reduce the bias on working parents. I think modern day life has a lot more sort of pressures that we can now accept are there. And if companies start encouraging flexible working, work from anywhere, hybrid working, I know it doesn't work for every job. Like I do know there's some jobs that it doesn't work for, but the ones where it does, if we can encourage that, like I think that's how companies could sort of help with this narrative around working parents. Individuals that work for these companies, there is a bit of a culture change as well. Like I just think we all need to be a bit more empathetic to our colleagues. And in this case, it's working mothers I'm talking about, but it's not just working mums, it's everyone.
And that comes from leadership as well.
Yeah, totally. So when I started working out, I definitely would have been guilty as a young 21-year-old or 2-year-old of maybe thinking that someone who left at 4 wasn't putting in as many hours of me, and then you could make that kind of narrative that they're less committed. And in the past, I think I would have done that. I can see people doing it. I can hear the conversations. But now I'm actually a working mum. I know that this isn't always the case. It may be with some people, but it isn't with me. Like when pre-pandemic, I had to go into work 5 days a week, and I had to pick up my daughter, so I had to leave at 4:30 every day. Because I knew I had a hard stop at 4:30, I worked really hard. I made sure I got all my tasks done. I was much more efficient, like maybe didn't have those kind of water cooler chats or take my lunch break, because I knew I had to get everything done before that 4:30 hard stop, because I had to go and get my daughter. I think that really the thing that we need to do in order to have this mindset reset is stop thinking about judging people on the time they put in and whether they're leaving at 4:30, and actually judging an employee on, are they doing the tasks they need to do of a good quality? So judging by output rather than input is something that I think we should do across the board, no matter what. But if we can do it a bit more with working mothers, maybe as individuals, we can shift that bias we have to someone working, you know, 4 days a week, And then when you shift that bias a bit, it'll also filter up at an organizational level as well. So you almost need like us all to do that. Like from my point of view, I just wish people would understand that there's the women that are coming back to work. You've got a huge financial pressure. Like I went back earning 20% less than I did before, but still probably doing 5 days working four. And you're also you're going back with this personal pressure. You might be sad to leave your children, or you might have all these other things like no sleep, juggle, all the things I mentioned. And actually, you could argue that the women that are coming back are actually more committed to their careers and their jobs because their own development, because they're coming back. So that massive drive to, even though there's all these pressures. If we could just reset that mindset a little bit more on a working mother being more committed in some ways, then it just might change the dial. For me.
Definitely. Even the working week you just said there, about working 4 days instead of five, and that's something, and another attitude that is starting to change, because you're right, you're probably doing 5 days and 4 days and you just do things more efficiently. And that is a trial that has been rolled out across several companies across Europe recently, because they did find that a 4-day week people were more productive. So it's just moving away from that attitude of, well, you must be doing less because you're working less.
Yeah, I just think whether you work 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, whatever you work, the time that people are working for, as long as they're getting their tasks and doing their job role within their time, that's what we should be judging them on. It should all be about output and not input anymore. We also all know you have times where you're productive and times where you're not productive. So I don't think there's any person in the working world that has days where they're always at their top ability, and days where they're like, and then there'll be some days where they're absolutely above and beyond their top ability. It's 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 not it's not always consistent, is it? People perform at different levels on different days, and I think that's the same with the output and input thing. It's just more about, are you doing your job? Are you getting everything you need to get done? Are you excelling at your job? Things like that.
Definitely. And we've spoken a little bit about soft skills earlier, and soft skills when you've taken time off, for instance, for maternity leave, and the new transferable skills that you would learn there. What about soft transferable skills that are important for a career in the tech sector, do you think?
So I think in the tech sector, the skills that are really important are, I think what I've noticed about the industry is that it's much more agile and fast moving than other industries. So I think the people that tend to do well are those that can adapt to the pace and then can adapt to change. So I think if you're someone who enjoys that and fast pacedness, then tech's a good industry for you. I think tech industries are often looking forward. So people that do well in tech are good at problem solving. They're also innovators. So I work in product and I scope out the apps and features. And there, my role is there to try and solve problems for those working in retail. So I know that my skills that I developed while as a merchandiser in problem solving are really essential for that. I also think if you go into product or the tech side, product side, then you need to be someone who's sort of user obsessed in my mind. So you're always thinking about the user in every decision you make. You don't want to be asking your dev teams to do work on something that's just a waste of time and not going to add value to your product. It should always be like, is this going to make the quality of my product better? And why am I doing it? When I worked in fashion, every decision you make is about the customer. You should be customer obsessed. So like moving into product, I felt like user obsession is the new one for me. Like, what is the UX and the UI, and why is that the best decision we can make? I also think if you're moving into a tech business that's a smaller business or a startup, I think what I've noticed in Sparkbox is that you need to be quite resourceful and proactive. So, startups, things move very fast and your priorities might change because you're looking at new clients or new opportunities. So you need to be someone that can move with that. So you need to be quite proactive at changing your priorities. And also, the reason I said resourceful is in smaller businesses, you might not be able to ask people questions all the time or have your hand held. You need to be someone who's a doer and just gets on with it, which is me to a T. So I've loved that. That's how you succeed in that smaller startup environment, I think.
Yeah, sometimes just pitching in because there's nobody else to do it. So you learn something new just to fill that gap until, your team grows. It's always good fun. And how can you stand out from the crowd as a transitioner, do you think? Sometimes it's hard, isn't it? Sometimes if you don't look like you have the experience, how do you stand out from everybody else?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the best way to stand out from a crowd, in an interview anyway, is by being really passionate. And I would have applied this as people applying internally to me in retail roles. But I think it really helps if you're a transitioner. So when I applied for Sparkbox, I knew I was moving into a new industry and it was a role I hadn't done before. But what I did feel confident is that I was an expert on the end user of the product and I
Yeah.
was really passionate about making that product. So I mentioned that a lot in my interview. And I think that if you are a transitioner and you're moving into tech, make sure you do a lot of research on what you're building and that you really understand that brand, because you might not have all the tech skills, but you can have some of the user knowledge, and also the external, looking at it from outside is always a good thing as well.
Yeah.
So really, as a transitioner, really study that brand that you're interviewing for and make sure you're incredibly passionate about what they're doing, especially startups.
Yes, because it is very hard, as you said, just ensuring that you look incredibly passionate or you've done some things, even outside of your day job. We love to see that here, people that are working with community networks, or people that are say they're passionate about women in technology and they might be working with volunteering groups or things like that. There are lots of ways to stand out and look passionate about a career that you might be transitioning into, but don't necessarily have the work experience yet. We get asked that question a lot on our live events. How do I stand out if I don't have the experience yet? It's something that people are always trying to struggle with. Bex, we're almost out of time, and I wanted to ask you one last question. Do you have any advice for our listeners who are perhaps thinking about taking the leap into tech?
Yeah, so I think I obviously work in products, so that's where I've got the best knowledge on moving into that from a tech point of view. And I think there are always, from my opinion, there's two routes into products. So you can either be someone who's worked in tech and then gets really interested in the user experience size, therefore moves more into product, or you can be someone like me who is someone who's very passionate about the product or the user or a subject matter expert, and you aren't necessarily someone with a lot of tech experience, but you come in and you say, well, I know a lot about that product and I can help you make it. So the advice that I said about being passionate about the brand, I think you should also be really, if you want to move into product and you're not actually been in tech before, really try and understand what are the business's vision and goals, and does my skill set give something to that they maybe need, even though I'm not someone in tech. So with me with Sparkbox, I knew that I knew a lot about merchandising, and therefore those skills could help them make those tools and products. So I think, if you want to move in, make sure you're bigging up the things that you do know that perhaps the more tech people don't know.
Yes.
And I think at the same time, saying the things that you want to learn. So I've absolutely adored learning like the app design part of it. And I think I was quite looking forward to that creative side. But when I came into the business, I knew that was something I needed to work on. And I did some courses, for example, on Figma, which is like an app design course. So I think it's also good, when you're moving as a transitioner, to know the things you're really confident at, but know the things that you need to work on more and address that as well. I think a lot of people think when you transition from one industry to another, you need to do further education. Like you need to go to university, or, you need to go and do some extra courses. And that might be right for some people, but I don't think it's always the next step. So I think, like I said, just you can look at a job spec and try and pick out the things within the job spec that you can deliver and what you could deliver that's more than the job spec as that candidate, and then be aware of the things that you haven't necessarily got and the skills you haven't necessarily got. And the other thing that I would just encourage people to do is, if you're thinking about transitioning into tech, try and get involved in any tech projects in the companies you're already in. I mentioned I was from retail and there was a lot of tech projects and going on around in the business. And for example, as a merchandiser, I was involved in some of our software implementation projects. I think that gives you a really good idea of understanding what it might be like to be in a company that implements software. So if you see opportunities around the business to learn more, then you should do that. And you might understand more about tech and decide if it's the right career fit for you as well.
Yeah, and I love the fact you touched upon training there. as well, because you are right. People think if I'm going to go off in a different career route, I might have to take some extra training or further education, and or a boot camp even, and all of those things. They're quite a commitment. They're, you know, a lot of commitment to time and resources. And if you are a working mum as well, you think, well, I've now got to fit in extra learning and development. By the end, you might think, actually, that's not the career for me anyway. So it is a lot to take on. And as you said, it's not always the case when you are transitioning in a career. There are lots of ladies that have transitioned into tech without doing the further education part, but just learning new skills. As you said, you learned Figma and extra training in the areas that you needed to learn. And obviously, you know, it's paying off for yourself because you play to your strengths and what you're good at.
Yeah, like I didn't think, you know, I've been learning stuff like a very basic level, things like SQL and some of the data stuff. I didn't think I'd be doing that in my career, but it's good to learn new things. And what I just want is that mums don't feel like they have to be stationary in their career. You can evolve your CV after having children. Like, just because you had a child doesn't mean you've had like a brain transplant. If you're someone that wanted to learn new things, I just hope there's always the opportunities to do that. And I feel like my career, like having that transition into a different industry, allowed me to go and do that after having children anyway.
Yeah, that is a lovely advice and a lovely point to end it on. Bex, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been a pleasure having you on. So thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
And to everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.